Good night, everybody. My name is Ben Bravery, and I live in Sydney. I was diagnosed with Stage 3 bowel cancer at 28, which was 4 years ago. And I learnt a lot, as a lot of people do, during my cancer diagnosis and treatment. But importantly, I learned a lot more about myself and what cancer meant to me once I returned to work. It was kind of like returning to work allowed me to complete some of that thinking and some of that work. Tonight, I'm going to share that part of my cancer journey, and my story is by no means an example of how things should be done or shouldn't be done. There's no right or wrong. This is just how I did them. So before cancer, I'd been living in China for 4 years and was building a science communication business. And like a lot of people who are 28 and kind of passionate about work, I was obsessed with hierarchies and money and responsibilities and all of those kinds of things, and all that kind of stopped. I was on a trip back to Melbourne to get a visa so I could go back to China for another year, and it was there that my cancer was diagnosed, and I didn't go back to China. I didn't get back there for 7 months. And in that time, everything I'd kind of built, because I was responsible for oversight and kind of driving it, eroded, so I didn't have the business. That meant my partner moved back here with me and became my primary financial provider, as well as my principal carer. And I'm mentioning that here because it's an important motivator for why I went back to work and felt like I really needed to contribute financially to the relationship. The first job I applied for was part-time, but it quickly morphed into a full-time job and then became a very busy job. And just to give you some context, I went back after chemotherapy, but I was still wearing a bag, having had bowel cancer, and was still injecting myself twice a day with anticoagulants because of a lung condition I had from chemo. So I threw myself into the job. Awesome passion, lovely colleagues, people loved me, I loved it, everything was going really well. And then about 6 months in, I got really tired, like really, really tired, kind of, chronic fatigue. And I developed some negative thinking. My motivation went out the window. I kind of lost that passion and enthusiasm, but I plodded on. And then a couple of months later, it all kind of came crashing back to me when I lost a grandmother on one side and a grandfather on another side within 3 weeks of each other, both to different types of cancer and cancer history. Still, I kept plodding on. So you may be hearing this and wanting to slam your mouse up and down or grab your monitor and shake it and say, Ben, it's so obvious what's going on, but I had to do these things, and this is how I learnt. I got out of that job and went to another job, and it was the exact same thing. It was an excellent opportunity. It was even busier. I was getting on with colleagues. I was achieving. I felt like everything was going really well. And then that switch kind of flicked again, and I got tired, and I started thinking in negative ways about the job. I lost motivation. Fatigue kind of set in. And it wasn't until that happened the second time, well, I could have just switched jobs again, or I could look at what's actually happening. And so I sat down with my boss and the HR team, and we talked about taking some leave. And the reason I wanted leave was because I felt like I really needed that physical space from work in order to process everything and kind of think about what had happened. It kind of felt like cancer was catching up to me in a way, and I hadn't really allowed the time to process it and think about how it was going to affect my working life. So I took that leave, and I kind of checked in with myself, and I checked in with family, because I think family is really insightful here. And I asked them how had I changed, and why did they think I was so tired, and what did they think I was achieving, and they came back with some really insightful stuff. And basically what I concluded was that the learnings that I had developed during cancer, I'd kind of forgotten, and I'd kind of got hijacked by wanting to be normal again and wanting to integrate into a workplace and be like everybody else and go to Friday night drinks and all that kind of stuff. And it was time to really validate that experience and be more authentic and appreciate how cancer had changed me, but also what I thought about work and what I wanted from work. And it wasn't so much about what I wanted to do for a job, it was how I wanted to do it and balance. So during that leave, I decided to opt out of full-time work, and that was kind of confronting to admit that I couldn't handle or didn't want to do full-time work at the moment. Working 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, 7 or 8 just didn't give me the opportunity to think about things properly and carefully, and my health was suffering. I also decided to, in that leave time, which was very recent, to think about maybe a career in medicine, which is a goal that had kind of been on the back burner for a while. And I'm proud to say I recently sat the graduate entrance exam a couple of weeks ago, and I've got a few weeks to wait before I get results. But either way, I feel like I'm acting now in a more authentic way, and a way that validates my cancer experience and makes me really appreciate how I've changed. In hindsight, and a lot of you are probably thinking this, I just went back to work too early. It was far too early, and I wasn't in the right frame of mind. So that's kind of, I kind of have 4 lessons that I learned and that I'd like to share with you tonight. The first is that thinking about your experience is really critical, and I know that's a silly thing to say, but it's easy to forget it all and go straight back to how things were. So I'm a scientist, so I really like charts. On the left, you can see a pie chart of the proportion of time, which is the green bit, that I've actually spent in cancer treatment out of the 32 years. But on the right, you can see the proportion of time I spend thinking about cancer. So it's huge. So I've only actually spent 1.5 years out of 32 focusing on cancer, but I've spent a huge amount of time thinking about it. And that's what I mean by giving yourself permission to think and feel about how cancer may have changed you. The second anecdote comes from work, when I was talking about these kind of big picture ideas about what does work mean, and do I really have to go to that meeting, and do I want to get up and do this every day, or do I want to do something different? And a colleague kind of pulled me aside and said, "You sound a lot like Peter Pan. You kind of just need to grow up." And I was kind of shocked by that, and then I thought about why I was shocked, and it's because I was after permission from my colleagues and my superiors and my friends, I guess, to pull out of work and do something different. And Peter Pan didn't have cancer, and I'll call you not Peter Pan, but give yourself that space. The third thing is something I didn't experience myself, but I've kind of picked it up from talking to a lot of survivors, which is something I call stage fright. And you can't live in China for any period of time and not become obsessed with pandas. And here's a very cute baby panda, very scared. And stage fright, for me, refers to that idea that a lot of cancer survivors have, where they feel like imposters because they had pre-cancer or early stage cancer, or their hospital treatment didn't seem that long, or they just had a couple of cycles of chemo. That's all kind of nonsense to me. You had cancer, and if cancer is affecting you, or you think it may be affecting you, then again, give yourself permission to act on that if needed, and at least give yourself the space to think about it. The fourth thing, which I've kind of embraced, and this is weird because it didn't appear to be an issue for me until I started to speak to other survivors, there was lots of talk about a CV gap. And the funny thing for me, and maybe it's the communications training, but I never saw my treatment kind of being pulled out of the workforce and stuck in a hospital or tied to a bed as a gap. Cancer is an enormous achievement, battling it and surviving it and caring for people with it. And I think there are a whole range of skills there that make you very attractive to certain employers. And certainly in both job interviews I've had since I finished treatment, I sell cancer. I talk about it straight up, and I think that's great, because if you talk about it in a positive way and kind of set the frame, people will think about it in a positive way, and it kind of normalizes it for people, and they don't get too weirded out. So, this is just a mock example of what my CV might look like. There's a couple of jobs there in China, and then there's this supposed gap. You could fill it with a whole range of skill sets, all kinds of stress management and relationship management, information management, compliance and budgeting and strategic planning and goal orientation and achievement focused, and all those kinds of corporate buzzwords. So my kind of learning was surviving cancer is an asset, and it has made you, for me, it made me a better person. It made me a more rounded person. It definitely made me a more empathic and rounded employee. And, the biggest KPI of all is that I'm still here to talk about it. So that's it for me, Jill.